At 10:48 and 16 seconds, a single missile leaves a mobile launcher on the Iranian coast, and USS Thomas Hudner's SPY-6 radar detects it 4 seconds later. One contact, one trajectory, one sea-skimming approach at 26 meters above the water, speed 940 kilometers per hour, bearing 061, range 142 nautical miles from USS Gerald Ford's outer screen. The Aegis combat system begins processing one inbound threat exactly the way it was built to process one inbound threat. Tactical Action Officer Lieutenant Commander Elias Ward has the engagement sequence running in under 11 seconds. 2 SM-6 interceptors assigned. Fire controls, solution building. Electronic warfare ready. Close-in system standing by behind the outer layer. The system was designed to defeat a missile that remains the same target from launch to impact. It was not designed to defeat a missile that stops being the thing the radar is shooting at. Gerald Ford has 8 minutes and 52 seconds before impact, and Chief Warrant Officer Mara Keegan has already seen the one signature that means the visible missile is not the real warhead. Keegan is not watching the guidance frequency. She is not watching the seeker emissions or the radar skin return that every other operator in the formation is using to build the fight. She is watching a thermal irregularity buried inside the contact's passive profile, a small but precise temperature split between the upper and lower body that should not exist in a conventional anti-ship missile flying straight and level at this speed. She has seen that split once before, 12 days earlier, during a failed Iranian test over open water that most of the task force logged as an incomplete weapons trial. Keegan had not logged it that way. She had written a 6-page assessment arguing that the body on radar was carrying a second thermally isolated internal vehicle, smaller, colder, and designed to survive the death of the outer shell. The report was reviewed, annotated, and filed under speculative because the test article had broken up before anyone could prove what sat inside it. Now the same thermal split is 8 minutes and 41 seconds from Gerald Ford, and speculative means nothing. To understand what Iran fired at the carrier that morning, you need to understand why the weapon was deadlier than a faster missile or a larger warhead. This was not Iran's deadliest anti-ship weapon because it flew beyond the reach of radar. It did not. It was deadliest because it divided the American defensive sequence into 2 separate fights and forced the carrier strike group to spend most of its time on the wrong one. The missile is called the Rod 4D. The outer body is a carrier shell, a long-range sea-skimming vehicle with a conventional radar signature, conventional engine plume, and conventional enough guidance behavior to trigger every familiar response in a U.S. carrier strike group. Inside that shell sits a smaller terminal dart, 2.1 meters long, thermally shielded, passive until release, and built to drop into the sea clutter 18 to 24 seconds before impact after the outer shell has already drawn the radar, the interceptors, the jamming, and the attention. The shell flies high enough to be managed. The dart does not. It falls to 4 meters above the water, emits almost nothing, and homes not on the center of the ship, but on the strongest surviving emitter or the highest value heat source inside the final approach basket. Iran had not built a missile that overpowered the carrier's defenses. Iran had built a missile that made the defenses protect the wrong half of the weapon. That is what made Keegan's first report so important, and that is why no one acted on it. She is a passive multispectral tracking specialist. 11 years into a job, most line officers barely think about unless something has already gone wrong. Her world is thermal drift, seam heating, transient flashes, exhaust discrimination, and the kind of small anomalies that matter only if somebody has time to notice them. During the failed Iranian test 12 days earlier, Keegan had captured a 0.7-second coolant purge flash along the lower starboard seam of the missile just 19 seconds before breakup. The main body had then climbed 6 meters, brightened, and come apart. Everybody else saw a malfunction. Keegan saw a release sequence on a prototype whose internal dart had either failed to ignite or impacted the water unobserved. She argued that the brightening was intentional, the climb was intentional, and the breakup was not a failure, but a transition. Her report included one line that now sat in the engagement archive, like a warning no one wanted to reread. If the weapon ever appeared in combat, the body on radar would not be the body that mattered. At 10:49 and 03 seconds, Keegan picks up the circuit to Combat Information Center. "Sir, this is Keegan in passive. The contact matches the internal body thermal split from the March 26th test article. This may be a 2-stage terminal weapon. Hold one interceptor in reserve for post-separation." Ward looks at the display. One contact, clean track, 8 minutes and 13 seconds to impact. 2 SM-6 already programmed and ready. Everything the doctrine says about missile defense tells him to kill the visible target as far out as possible, not save missiles for a second body nobody can yet see. He tells Keegan her assessment is logged and asks her to continue monitoring for confirmation. At 10:49 and 21 seconds, the first SM-6 launches from Thomas Hudner. 6 seconds later, the second follows. On the bridge, Gerald Ford begins a modest course adjustment to tighten the engagement geometry with her Eastern escort. In the electronic warfare suite, broad-spectrum jamming comes alive across the frequencies the outer shell is expected to use. The strike group is fighting the missile exactly as it has fought dozens of other missiles. That is the problem. What the system believed was happening was a conventional outer layer intercept against one sea-skimming threat. What was actually happening was that every defensive action the formation took was helping the carrier shell do its job. The shell did not need to survive to score a hit. It needed to absorb the fight long enough for the internal dart to reach its release window. The more attention the shell received, the less anyone was preparing for the smaller threat inside it. Iran did not design the shell to defeat the defense. Iran designed it to make the defense irrelevant to the real warhead. At 10:52 and 11 seconds, the first SM-6 reaches projected intercept and detonates 38 meters off the shell's port quarter. A strong shot against a normal missile. The shell takes damage, sheds fragments, and keeps flying. The second interceptor arrives 4 seconds later and detonates even closer, 14 meters below the main airframe. The outer shell yaws, corrects, and continues inbound with a brightening thermal plume that the tactical plot interprets as battle damage. Keegan sees something else. The lower seam temperature has dropped, not risen. The shell is venting coolant into an insulated cavity. That means the internal dart is still there, still cold, and still protected. She calls again at 10:52 and 23 seconds. The shell is alive, but the lower cavity is colder than ambient plume. Internal vehicle has not released. A real target not yet on scope. Ward does not ignore her. He has started to understand that her problem may be real, but he also has a damaged inbound missile, 4 minutes and 45 seconds to impact, and no visible second contact to assign. At 10:53 and 09 seconds, the outer shell enters the next engagement window. Thomas Hudner prepares another SM-6. USS Jason Dunham, 11 nautical miles to the northeast, begins building a supporting track. The shell does something unexpected then, not by maneuvering wildly, but by becoming simpler. It stops weaving. It stops correcting. It settles into a stable line toward the carrier's starboard forward quarter, exactly the kind of obedient path that invites a cleaner intercept solution. That is when Keegan becomes certain. A shell preparing to hold one stable line this close to the ship is not trying to survive. It is trying to be shot at in the most predictable way possible, so the body inside it knows precisely when separation must occur. She does not need a classified brief or a second opinion now. She needs 20 seconds of authority the system does not want to give her. At 10:53 and 41 seconds, she transmits the words nobody in missile defense likes hearing with 3 minutes to impact. The shell is bait. Post-separation target will drop low starboard and go passive. Real aim point will not be hull centerline. Ward asks the only question worth asking. What is it aiming for? Keegan overlays the shell's present course with the carrier's live emission pattern, the deck heat map, and the orientation of the starboard forward island face. The answer appears in one ugly line. The highest stable emitter on the ship's current aspect is not the flight deck. It is the starboard forward SPY 6 face and associated island communications cluster. Exactly the part of the carrier now carrying the burden of coordinating the air war around the formation. A hit there does not sink Gerald Ford. It blinds, deafens, and slows the most important ship in the group, while preserving enough hull for the damage to become operational, not symbolic. Keegan sends it. Starboard island face. It wants the arrays. At 10:54 and 18 seconds, the third SM-6 launches. At 10:54 and 49 seconds, just 1 minute and 47 seconds before impact, Keegan sees the 0.7-second purge flash she had written about 12 days earlier. The flash runs along the shell's lower seam. Micro doors open. The outer body rises 5 meters. A small, cold contact falls out of the radar picture and drops into the sea clutter at 4 meters above the water. The shell climbs slightly, brightens, and continues straight toward the carrier on the original bearing. The tactical display shows one contact because the shell is still the bigger, brighter, more honest target. The real warhead is now 1.9 nautical miles south of that line and 1.6 meters above the top of the wave clutter gate. Keegan sees both bodies for 0.9 seconds on passive. Then the lower one disappears again. Separation confirmed, she says at 10:54 and 50 seconds. You are tracking the shell. The dart is low starboard, passive, 4 meters. The third SM-6 kills the shell at 10:55 and 02 seconds. On the tactical board, it looks like success. Large explosion, debris cloud. 1 inbound, destroyed. On Keegan's display, the explosion is only proof that the wrong part died. The dart continues inbound, too low and too cold for a clean, immediate handoff, aimed at the one part of the carrier still radiating like a lighthouse. What radar classified as a kill is not a kill. It was the moment the actual attack became visible only to the person who had warned about it before it ever launched. The remaining time to impact is 54 seconds. Phalanx can engage it if the geometry is clean. The geometry is not clean. The dart is approaching from the starboard forward quarter, where the island, deck edge, and the residual radar emissions from the carrier's own starboard arrays complicate the firing lane. Worse, the dart is passive. Jamming does not matter. Decoys matter only if they are brighter than the thing it already wants. Keegan had thought about this too, not because anyone asked her to, but because the logic of the weapon demanded a second half. If the dart homes on the strongest surviving emitter after separation, then killing it may be less effective than making it want something else. At 10:55 and 11 seconds, she calls for something no one in CIC had planned to do in the middle of an inbound missile fight. Kill the starboard forward face for 6 seconds. Launch Nulka starboard. Hudner full SLQ-32 hot. Make the escort brighter than we are. Ward looks at the display. The ship is already fighting one invisible contact with less than a minute on the clock, and now a passive sensor specialist is telling him to deliberately blank one of the carrier's radar faces during terminal approach. Under ordinary circumstances, that would be close to insanity. Now, under these circumstances, it is the only move that addresses the real problem. The dart is not chasing the hull. It is chasing the emission geometry around the hull. Change the geometry and the dart must solve again with almost no time left. Rear Admiral Mercer authorizes it at 10:55 and 17 seconds. Gerald Ford's starboard forward spy 6 face goes dark 4 seconds later. USS Thomas Hudner launches a Nulka active decoy at 10:55 and 24 seconds, 430 meters off the carrier's starboard beam, while driving its SLQ-32 suite at maximum deceptive power. For 6 seconds, the brightest, cleanest, most coherent target in the dart's seeker basket is no longer the carrier's island face. It is a destroyer-emitted false point hanging outboard of the formation where nothing that matters is supposed to be. Keegan sees the change before the radar does. The dart's thermal smear moves 11 degrees right. Not a huge turn. It does not need to be. At 700 kilometers per hour and under a minute to impact, 11 degrees is the difference between a dart hitting the starboard arrays and a dart crossing into the clean engagement lane of the destroyer that just made itself look delicious. Thomas Hudner's forward phalanx acquires at 1.7 nautical miles. The first burst begins at 10:55 and 39 seconds and misses behind the target because the dart is still completing its turn toward the false emitter. The second burst begins 3 seconds later, with the geometry stabilized and the dart now committed to the new line. The rounds hit at 0.9 nautical miles. Not a near miss, not a fragment scare. A full strike into the dart's body and warhead section while it is still outside lethal range to the carrier. The detonation occurs at 10:55 and 44 seconds, 0.8 nautical miles off Gerald Ford's starboard bow. The pressure wave slams into the outer hull and rattles compartments on the forward island. But no fragments reach the arrays. No fire starts on deck, and the carrier stays fully in the fight. In Combat Information Center, Ward stands still for 2 seconds because everyone in the room understands what just happened. The missile they had tracked for 7 minutes was not the missile that nearly killed them. The thing that nearly killed them was the one body the system had not wanted to believe existed until Keegan forced them to believe it, with 54 seconds left. Mercer picks up the circuit immediately. "Keegan, walk me through the emitter shift." She answers without drama because this was never drama to her. It was pattern. The dart was homing on the strongest persistent starboard emitter after separation. The shell's purpose was to keep us fighting the wrong body until the dart had a solved terminal basket. If we stayed brightest, it stayed on us. Hudner and the Nulka gave it a better answer. Mercer asks the next question even before the ship finishes, confirming no damage to the island face. "How long have you had the launcher?" Keegan has been collecting the shell's update bursts since 10:48 and using bearing drift from each encrypted transmission to build a fix on the launch platform. The outer body, while everyone was busy fighting it, had been talking home every 22 seconds. She had the frequency 8 minutes ago. She has the position now, accurate to within 21 meters. "Since launch, sir." Strike authorization goes out at 10:56 and 12 seconds. On 6 BGM 109, Tomahawks leave the vertical launch cells at 10:57. The launcher is 304 kilometers away on the Iranian coast. The Tomahawks reach it at 11:28 and 31 seconds. The first missile hits the mobile launcher. The second and third destroy the support vehicles and telemetry mast. The fourth, fifth, and sixth arrive over the next 19 seconds and erase the communications trailer, the spare carrier shells, the 2 remaining terminal darts still mounted in climate-controlled transport canisters, and the guidance crew that had spent 3 years building a weapon designed to split the American kill chain into 2 separate fights.